In physical card games, once a card's been released, it's kinda stuck like that. You can't send some Pokemon executive to each household and try to Sharpie over everybody's Pikachu if you make a mistake. The advantage a digital-only game like Hearthstone has is that I can change cards whenever. And I actually just went over some of the biggest changes in my last video on the biggest nerfs in the history of the game. But even in Hearthstone, sometimes cards are so fundamentally strong or immediately problematic that they need to be banned even in the digital space. So, here is every single card banned ever from Hearthstone Standard and Wild formats.
Open Tinder. What does BANNED mean?
In a pretty shocking move at the time, the first ever banned Hearthstone card was Stealer of Souls, being banned in Wild on June 16th, 2021. You see, the appeal of the Wild format was that you could use any card ever in the game without the restrictions of the Standard format. The banning of Stealer of Souls really flew in the face in the typical laissez-faire attitude of the game mode. But it was hard to come up with a better solution than a ban since the card was also legal in the Standard format and was not close to needing a nerf. The reason for this was cards like Violet Illusionist, Mal'Ganis, and Plot Twist were available in Wild, which made massive combos with Stealer possible, unlike the relatively tame nature of the card in the Standard format. So the Bounce team was left with two choices. Massively nerf the card, making it worthless in both Standard and Wild, or ban the card in Wild only to at least give players a chance to consider the card in Standard. The ban was joined with an announcement to players who wanted to use the card in Wild that when the card would normally rotate out of the Standard format, it would be given a nerf to stop the crazy combos and unbanned from Wild. And true to their word, Stealer of Souls was unbanned, and nerfed heavily, only changing the cost of the first card you draw each turn. And also, the mechanic of cards that cost health still damaging you while your hero is immune was added to make absolutely sure nothing would go wrong.
Gauge you bad, and you're bad, bro! Did I ask? No!
After having no bans for like 7 years, we see another card banned in Wild 3 months after Stealer of Souls, the Warlock questline, the Demon Seed. Released in Hearthstone's biggest power spike of an expansion, United in Stormwind, it was impressive that this card stood out so much even amongst all the other outstanding strategies in the set. Prior to multiple nerfs, the parts of the quest would require you to take 6, 7, and 8 damage during your turns, and rewarded you with Blightborn Tamsin. This card would make your opponent now take any damage you would take on your turns instead of you. After playing Tamsin, it was a simple matter of drawing into Fatigue or playing a boatload of self-damage cards to secure the win. While it was good in Standard, the Wild format had 7 years of self-damage support that were not printed with this card in mind, and that made it ban-worthy. Most of these cards were designed with self-damage being a cost and not actually being a hugely desirable payoff. For instance, Unlicensed Apothecary was previously an unplayable meme card that suddenly became very relevant for the pace at which you could damage yourself. Crystallizer was an irrelevant card for a long time, but was basically perfect for this deck as it gave you 5 free damage to yourself. This is also before mentioning previously strong cards that slotted very well into the deck. Kobold Librarian, who has a strong case for the strongest card ever, was perfect for the deck, as was the always problematic Dark Glare, who could refresh mana for taking damage and was already helming a strong self-damage strategy in Wild before the Demon Seed ever made an appearance. Raise Dead was free, damaged yourself, and brought back your librarians or crystallizers to keep racing through the quest. Spirit Bomb was now an insane piece of removal. The only thing that could really stop you was if your opponent had an ice block up, but since you were zooming through your deck with cards like Backfire or Solarium, you could afford to be silly and throw in an Eater of Secrets or even Curse of Rafam. Don't believe me? Here's a number 1 and number 10 Legend deck list with those cards. Weird. For the crime of being alright in Standard and totally soul-crushing in Wild, the Demon Seed was banned from the Wild format on September 21st, 2022.
In 10 minutes of the stream starting. Alright, ban that guy for as long as it takes.
Switcheroo. A card that doesn't look that threatening at first, partially due to the cute artwork and the name, Switcheroo enabled some uncompetitive strategies in Wild that could consistently end the game in 3 or 4 turns. The card originally swapped both the attack and health of the minions drawn, but it was actually banned with the current nerfed effect. If you can't see why this card might cause issues, it might be because you don't know about the dankness. A card that was far too slow to see any real competitive play, the card was mostly just the answer to the trivia question, which minion has the highest stats in the game. These stats are precisely why this card was useful for Switcheroo, because if you built a deck where the only two minions are a 1-cost Stone Tusk Boar and the Darkness, you can very easily get a 20 attack minion that can attack instantly. Combined with cards like Vivid Nightmare to duplicate the Boar, a Switcheroo on turn 3 could mean 40 damage on turn 4. Even with the effect nerfed to just swapping health, the 0-mana Topsy-Turvy still exists and opens up combos with Divine Spirit to still make the Boar pretty strong. Part of the ban, I think, was also due to how random the strategy could make games. Sometimes your opponent would draw the Darkness in their opening hand before they could Switcheroo and be pretty much out of luck that game. Then other times they could open Switcheroo and Vivid Nightmare and you would have absolutely no chance. While it's unfortunate that this card had to be banned and that it caused so many unenjoyable gaming experiences, it's nice that the Darkness could finally be used in a serious deck.
Was able to get himself banned in record time in just under 1.5 seconds.
Tome Tampering. Hey look, it's a Warlock card again. And hey look, it got banned because it had 8 years of synergistic cards printed that weren't designed with this type of enabler in mind. And hey look, an image asking you to subscrindo to Chundo. Discard effects have long been part of the Warlock class's design ethos. To play into the fantasy of an evil magic user willing to sacrifice anything for power, Warlock from the beginning has had effects that sacrificed health or cards in hand for powerful effects. The issue is that, like with the self-damaging effects for the Demon Seed, you can release a few cards every year that benefit discard strategies and not see much of a problem, until one day the deck hits a critical mass and becomes a nuclear bomb of you on the ranked wild ladder. To illustrate this, for a long time in Hearthstone, the only cards that had an effect when discarded were Silverware Golem, which would summon itself, and Fist of Jaraxxus, which would do 4 damage to a random enemy. Having just these two cards, it made it unlikely that one of them would happen to be in your hand when you're activating a discard effect, so they weren't that strong. Then the designers tried to add more support to the strategy and added Clutch Mother Zavis, which was still too slow and too bad. But then you get Hand of Gul'dan, which draws 3 cards when discarded, and Boneweb Egg, which summons 2 2/1 spiders when it's discarded, and Suffocating Shadows, which deadly shots a minion, and Soul Barrage and Walking Dead and Furnace Fuel, and now you have to nerf Cataclysm because discarding your whole hand is too good of an effect. Now, Tome Tampering actually got banned before a lot of these cards even came out. It was never legal in Wild with Furnace Fuel, for instance, so you can imagine how problematic this card would be if it got unbanned and had even more synergies to work with.
These guys are about to get banned.
Test subject. Hey look, we're 5 bans in and I've only seen Warlock and Priest cards. I wonder if this pattern will continue. I know it will because I wrote the script already. Well, the Balance team decided to take "Get me out of here" seriously and ban Test Subject from Wild before bashing its knees in and unbanning it later. Before its ban, Test Subject was known for being the focal point of a high skill ceiling, high APM combo priest deck that involved using Radiant Elemental to discount your spells, and then playing Vivid Nightmares, Divine Spirit, and then Topsy-Turvy to set the health of the Test Subject to 0, thus triggering its Death Rattle and netting you an extra Divine Spirit. You would then play a bunch of Divine Spirits on its Stone Tusk Boar, hey, you're the guy from before, to get it to 32 health before using Topsy-Turvy on it to give it 32 attack and destroy the enemy hero. So when Mindseer was revealed in Return to Naxxramas, people realized that on turn 3 you could play Radiant Elemental, Test Subject, and then spam Embalming Ritual and Mindseer infinitely until the opposing portrait exploded. Thus, Test Subject was preemptively banned before the release of Return to Naxxramas, before it could OTK anyone for fewer mana than Evil Heckler.
All of you! You're all banned! Banned, 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 banned!
Crimson Clergy. Who could have guessed? It's Priest again. In one of the weirder card changes ever, Blizzard just decided to completely remodel this card. Originally, Crimson Clergy read, after a friendly character is healed, gain +1 attack. Then, not because it was too strong or anything, the card was completely reworked to be overhealed, draw 1 card. Well, it turns out that Priest has a lot of 0 mana healing cards in Wild, like Circle of Healing and Regenerate, and 1 mana cards that can become 0 mana with Radiant Elemental. Hey, you're the guy from before. Like Flash Heal, Gift of the Naru, and Light of the Naru. and now that you are Max Verstappening through your deck, you can get up to some shenanigans. At first this led to combos involving cards like Heartbreaker Hedonist or even Mechathune, but the combos were not that problematic. That all changed when the Audiopocalypse miniset was released and Funnel Cake was introduced to the game. Now you could overheal and refresh mana crystals all in one card and extend your combos even more. It didn't end up becoming as broken as some of the other cards in this list, but like many of the previous entries, any nerf to the card would make it worthless in Standard and Wild, so they just decided to leave it alone in Standard and ban it in Wild.
I finally came to the conclusion you look like Sab95H. You're banned out of Shrink for the rest of your life.
Mech Warper. Our first non-priest or warlock card on the list, this card was actually part of a patch that banned 2 cards, a first for the game. Released in Hearthstone's first ever expansion, Goblins vs. Gnomes, Mech Warper reduces the cost of your mechs by 1. And like a lot of cost reductions in Hearthstone, it becomes very problematic when it reduces cards below 1 mana. Mechs as a tribe are notoriously good at dealing damage to face due to the magnetic keyword that can sometimes be as strong as charge. Paired with cards like Galvanizer, mech strategies could discount their whole hands and vomit a ton of mechs on the board early. Also, notice how I am saying mech strategies and not just one class in particular, because this card was useful across classes like Mech Paladin, who could use Radar Detector to draw 5 cards, to Mech Mage, who could evaporate opponents with Mecha Shark, and Mecha Rogue, who's from the scrap heap, could produce 3 free mechs. Ultimately, that Mech Paladin became a bit too much. You see, with Stonehearth Vindicator, you're pretty much running 4 copies of Radar Detector, and an aggro deck where you can refill that consistently is going to be a bit of a nightmare for balance.
We have Pot of Greed. This card was banned because no one could figure out what it actually does, and was voted as the #1 most confusing card in the game in the 2008 World Championship.
Tony, King of Piracy. In that same patch, we also had Tony, King of Piracy banned from Wild for its combos, with the Jailer, who was then banned a few days later, this time from Standard as well. I just talked about this in my top 10 biggest nerfs video, but the gist of it was that stealing all your opponent's resources for the rest of the game was way too debilitating of an effect to be allowed to exist. Before I get to the most recent banned card, I wanted to list some other cards that could be considered banned, but I don't for this list. Jotun the Eternal was banned upon release for a glitch involving casting all spells when drawn. Magister Dawngrasp's hero power was apparently causing players' games to crash and was temporarily banned. Grim and Gruntled Patrons were temporarily banned due to creating an infinite combo with Corpse Explosion and were later changed to not leaving corpses. I don't really count these as banned since they were more about needing time to be fixed for the purpose of glitches and not strategically. Gen and Baku, along with the rest of the odd and even cards, were rotated into the Hall of Fame 1 year early. This is a bit of a tricky one since it's sort of like they were banned in Standard, but for this video I really wanted to focus on cards that had the term banned used and had this red ribbon appear on their cards in-game. Also, all the other cards were banned in Wild, which is more interesting since every card eventually rotates out of Standard, but you usually have to do something pretty intense to get banned from Wild. The same thing applies to cards like Ragnaros and Ice Block that were originally intended to be evergreen but were added to the Hall of Fame and only usable in Wild because, you can still use them in Wild. The one Amalgam banned, this one would actually be in a video about every banned card, but this is about every banned card. Disguised Toast was banned for talking about an exploit in the game. Blitzchung was banned for saying free Hong Kong.
Cacturne is completely banned from competitive play in Gen 3 OU.
Pyrot Technician. The most recent ban, and probably the weirdest one, Pyrot Technician was recently banned for it's a little hard to explain. In a deck known as Fire Druid, you would play Thaddeus the Monstrosity to reduce the cost of your even cost cards by 4, and then play Cover Artist on the Thaddeus to further reduce your even cost cards, and maybe even play another one to reduce their cost by 12. You then play Pyrot Technician and a bunch of cheap spells to generate fire spells, and you have a pretty good chance at generating cards like Fireball or Pyroblast to direct at your opponent's face. And since a lot of fire spells are even costed, even if you get Embers of Strength or something else that doesn't deal direct damage, Thaddeus makes those costs 0, so you can just play them and get a new fire spell. Now look, I'm no expert. In fact, I'm just a dog in a suit with human hands. But, feels like maybe the card that makes all your cards cost nothing was actually a card that was broken and should have been banned. Anyway, Pyrot Technician has since been unbanned and Thaddeus has been nerfed to only reducing the cost by 2. Alright, well, if you want to not get banned from the Chundo Discord server, remember to follow these rules and join it too. Please join the Chundo Discord server. Also, please subscribe as well. We just hit 5,000 subscribers, which is quite cool. But please continue to subscribe. Thanks for watching.